Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 854 for January 18th, 2021. Coming up in a few minutes.
The single malt whiskey consumer is a much more informed individual now, and certainly the kind of footprint that we are operating within. There are many well-educated, well-informed consumers who are looking for different twists, and that's kind of what we're providing.
It's been 3.5 years since Billy Walker and his partners acquired the GlenAllachie Distillery in Scotland from Chivas Brothers. They've been putting their stamp on the place ever since. Part of that included a new wood management program for the maturing whiskey that came along with the deal, and we're now starting to see the impact of that program. I'll talk with Billy Walker on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Your Voice, Behind the Label, and...
There's been mass closings of restaurants and bars that don't plan on reopening. That's already happened and continuing to happen, but hopefully we can slow that pace down.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hey whiskey fans, I'm Gabriel Cardarella, brand ambassador for the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. You could probably guess I've got a lot of stories, but for me, the good ones have one thing in common. They're best told over a glass of whiskey. So hit pause, grab your bottle of Dewar's, and let's get back to this episode of WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. The political landscape changes significantly this week when Joe Biden becomes the 46th President of the United States Wednesday. The incoming administration is planning to hit the ground running with a $1.9 trillion COVID-19 economic relief package for Congress and executive orders overturning many of Donald Trump's actions. There's also hope that the Biden administration might take a look at the Trump trade tariffs on European wines and distilled spirits, including the tariff on single malts from Scotland and Northern Ireland. This week, the American Distilled Spirits Alliance called on the president-elect to remove the tariffs during his first 100 days in office. The move could come as part of the incoming administration's stated goal of repairing relationships with U.S. allies. That COVID-19 economic relief package is of special interest to the U.S. hospitality community. Of course, bars and restaurants have been among the hardest-hit businesses worldwide because of public health restrictions. Previous U.S. relief packages have treated bars and restaurants largely the same as other businesses, with no special assistance available to struggling hospitality businesses. Kim Hasserud of the United States Bartenders Guild is hoping the Biden administration and Congress remember those struggles as they debate the latest round of economic aid.
Restaurant and bar owners, they need it. The staff needs it. And I hope we see a big push for that. I think that will help a lot and help at least sustain them, in the time until we can kind of figure this out. So I think that's going to be really critically important. I mean, we know there's been mass closings of restaurants and bars that don't plan on reopening. That's already happened and continuing to happen, but hopefully we can slow that pace down.
The USBG's Bartender Emergency Assistance Program raised nearly $10 million for its COVID-19 relief effort and distributed 32,000 grants to bar workers for help with rent, food, and utility bills. The average grant was just $300, and only about half of those who completed applications for the grants received them. While that specific program has now been shut down, the need for financial assistance will continue for many months to come, as the future for the industry remains very shaky.
I think part of what adds to the stress is just the not knowing, if they are going to go back to work or when they're going to go back to work or how much money they're going to make in a week. Normally before that could be something that is kind of more or less predictable. But I think it's the unpredictability nature of all of this is causing a lot of, stress and pain. But we are going to get through it. I'm confident that the hospitality industry in generally will always prevail because people, like going to bars. It's a hub of the community. So I don't think that's going to change. It's just going to change in how we do it. So I do think that there's still going to be, a world of hurt in the form of unemployment and what that's going to look like, what stimulus is going to look like. So we're going to continue to do the work.
4,500 individual donors and 200 corporate donors supported the COVID-19 relief program during 2020. With the transition to a Democratic president and the Democrats also taking control of the Senate in addition to the House, many of the last-minute regulatory changes rushed through in the final weeks of the Trump administration will be getting a lot of scrutiny. The Treasury Department's Tax and Trade Bureau moved to open up more legal bottle sizes for distilled spirits and wines 2 weeks ago. While that has not generated a lot of controversy, it is worth noting that the regulation could be up for review. The Congressional Review Act gives Congress 60 legislative days to vote down a regulatory change, and technically, regulatory changes are not supposed to take effect until after that period. It only takes a majority vote in both the House and Senate to overturn a regulatory change. Back in 2017, Republicans in Congress used the law to throw out 14 different regulatory changes from the Obama administration. We'll keep an eye on this story. Last time around, I shared my tasting notes for one of Filibuster Distillery's bourbons, and we had an interview with Filibuster founder Sid Dillari last November in episode 843. We have more news on the Northern Virginia distillery this week, and it is not good, especially when you listen to his comments on the importance of water in that interview.
The reason why Scotland is Scotland, the reason why Kentucky is Kentucky, the reason why it's water plays the major role. So we sit on 80 feet of limestone in Virginia, we are blessed. So that was the reason that we didn't choose DC, or DC didn't choose us, and we had to move to Virginia.
This week, Dillari, Filibuster Distillery, and the separate Filibuster Barrels LLC were all indicted by a Virginia grand jury on 115 separate felony counts of violating the state's water control law. The indictment accuses Dillari and Filibuster of dumping more than 40,000 gallons of industrial wastewater into a Shenandoah County stream between November 2018 and last September. What's more, the indictment accuses Dillari of lying to investigators about the dumping before eventually admitting to it. It's the first time Virginia's Attorney General has sought criminal indictments in a case under the water control law. The 115 counts are because the law considers each day of violation to be a separate infraction, and each violation is punishable by at least a year in prison as well as fines. We have asked Filibuster's PR person for the distillery's side of the story. The first court hearing in the case is set for January 27th. It's not clear yet whether Dillari has surrendered to authorities. You'll find more details and a link to the Attorney General's news release in the news section at whiskycast.com. Elsewhere in Northern Virginia, Catoctin Creek Distilling is putting its still and equipment up for sale. Okay, this is a good thing. It's because they're replacing the 12-year-old original 400-liter still and tanks with a brand-new 2,000-liter system in a $1 million upgrade project. The work is expected to be completed in June. In other news, there has been a bit of a shake-up in Kentucky, where Sarah Barnes has joined the Kentucky Distillers Association as its new Director of Industry Responsibility and sustainability. She's moving over from Bourbon Women, where she was the executive director, but there is no need to send in your resume for that job, since Maggie Kimbrell was immediately named as the group's new executive director. She remains the editor of American Whiskey magazine and a contributor to Whiskey magazine. Meanwhile, we are starting to see new whiskeys making 2021 debuts. Seattle's Westland Distillery is taking its annual Peat Week event and release virtual this year, with a pair of single-cask, heavily peated single malts matured for more than 7 years. One spent its entire time in an ex-bourbon barrel, while the other was finished in a Mount Gay rum barrel. Both were made with peated barley imported from Scotland. The whiskeys will be available exclusively at the distillery in Seattle, and there's also word that starting 2 years from now, the Peat Week special releases will be replaced by the new Solom single malt that's distilled with barley peated and malted locally in Washington State. On the rye whiskey front, Cooper Spirits is coming out with a 20-year-old version of the late Rob Cooper's Lock, Stock, and Barrel Rye. He selected the barrels before his death a couple of years ago. It'll carry a recommended retail price of $389 a bottle. Former Russian Standard USA CEO Leonid Yangarber is moving into the rye whiskey business. He has teamed up with Kentucky Artisan Distillery owner Steve Thompson and wine industry veteran Ludwig Vaneron to launch the Coalition Whiskey brand. They are starting off with a barrel-proof straight rye, along with 3 different wine cask finishes from Bordeaux, Margaux, Pauillac, and Sauternes. The finishes will sell for around $90 a bottle, the barrel-proof around $130. Tom & Toole has confirmed the global release of its new cigar malt created by master distiller Robert Fleming. It's a blend of selected Tom & Toole vintages along with some rare peated Tom & Toole malt. It's bottled at 43% ABV. There's no word on pricing. Dublin's Teeling Whiskey Company is out with the 4th and final release in its Brabazon series of Irish single malts. It's a 13-year-old whiskey, finished for the final 2 years in Carcavelos port wine casks. It's available right now in Ireland and will be available soon in Europe, Russia, Asia, and Australia. The recommended retail price, €95 each. Meanwhile, Ireland's Killowen Distillery is out with the final release in its Bonded Experimental series, a 10-year-old Irish blend finished in virgin Hungarian oak casks. Just 356 bottles are available at a recommended retail price of €90 each. And Suntory is planning to release the Yamazaki Limited Edition 2021 release at the end of May. It's a blend of Yamazaki malts at least 12 years old, all matured in virgin Mizunara oak casks. The price tag will be around $400 a bottle. Finally, here's an example of how whiskey might just help you live longer. Mary Nicholson celebrated her 106th birthday this past Tuesday. She has survived COVID-19 twice after testing positive again on New Year's Eve. The Daily Mail newspaper talked with her this week in the UK. She credits a butter and cream-rich diet, along with what she calls, quote, a tipple of whiskey at night. More power to her. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. Had a lot of fun Friday night on our Happy Hour webcast with the guys from the Off Track with Hinch and Rossi podcast. IndyCar drivers James Hinchcliffe and Alexander Rossi and their producer Tim Durham joined us to taste whiskeys and talk about motorsports. You can catch the webcast on demand at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. With the inauguration this week, we'll talk about America's first president and distiller this Friday night. Steve Bayshore and Lisa Wicker from George Washington's Distillery at Mount Vernon will join me for the Happy Hour webcast. Catch it this Friday at 5 p.m. New York time, 2200 GMT on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Periscope. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Got some big news from Whiskey Advocate magazine this week. First off, the inaugural Big Smoke meets Whiskey Fest in Hollywood, Florida, that had been moved to this spring from last fall, has now been pushed back again, this time until October 30th. In addition, Whiskey Fest's fall dates have now been announced, starting with Chicago on November 5th, New York November 11th, and San Francisco on December 5th. Between now and then, Bonham's will hold its first whiskey auction of the year, January 29th in Hong Kong. McNair's has its first auction of 2021 on February 12th in Glasgow, Scotland. As of now, the Beer, Bourbon, and Barbecue Festival is still on for February 27th in Tampa, Florida, though its March events in Wilmington and Cary, North Carolina, have both been postponed until later this year. The National Whiskey Festival in Aberdeen, Scotland is still on for March 27th, along with the Galleria Whiskey and Wine Festival in Houston, Texas, April 3rd, and the Bergen Whiskey and Beer Festival, April 16th and 17th in Bergen, Norway. Remember, all in-person events should still be treated as tentative for now, since plans could change at the last minute because of public health restrictions. We are updating the calendar at whiskycast.com throughout the week as we get updates from event organizers. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. Catoctin Creek co-founder Scott Harris is leading his 7th annual Art of the Cocktail class this winter. This year it's all online each Friday night through February 12th. Scott's looking at wacky and weird ingredients you may have never tried before in a cocktail, including things like veggies, salt, chili peppers, and even beans. Get all the details at catoctincreekdistilling.com, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Hiya, Mark. How's my favourite Redbreast fan doing? Look, I'm going to address the elephant in the room right away. We both know your podcast is dying for a co-host, and I know just the lad who can be the Robin to your Batman. How's that for dropping a hint?
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by the Distiller's Edition collection. For many years, Scotland's GlenAllachie distillery was relatively obscure. Under Chivas Brothers' ownership, almost all of its output was used for blending, with just the occasional release of a single malt. That started to change in the summer of 2017, when Billy Walker and his partners acquired the distillery and its maturing inventory, along with the rights to the McNair's and White Heather whiskey brands. The flagship single malts have been receiving good reviews over the last couple of years since their launch, and 2021 will see more special releases from the GlenAllachie, starting with 2 wine cask finishes. A 13-year-old Rioja cask finish and an 11-year-old Bulgari Superiore wine cask finish are on the way. Just part of the future Billy Walker has in mind for the distillery. We talked this week, and he's optimistic despite the challenges of the past year.
Well, from a business point of view, they're going extremely well, actually. There are some funny things happening in the world, Mark. You know, people not traveling, people not going on holiday, people not buying through travel retail, people being more restricted in their movements and engaging with local retailers, local delis, liquor stores. We've actually had a surprisingly very good year. And who knows if that will continue, but we're not at all disappointed with the direction of travel we're in at the moment. I think things are going pretty well. The team is well established. Everybody's on message, and we're just, as I say constantly, we are striving for perfection. and we're on the journey.
Nobody ever quite gets to perfection, though, do they?
No, but if you can get to 90% of your ambitions, then it's a great place to arrive. And the last 10% should never leave your thrust for ambition.
So what have you learned in I think it's been, 3 years now since you guys bought the distillery?
It's 3 years, almost 3 years, maybe 3.5 years. What have we learned? One thing we always knew, Mark, the kind of business that we were in. We knew the kind of routes to market that we were comfortable with, and we were defining who we wanted to be. We didn't want to be a mass volume business. We wanted to continue to be a focused boutique style operation, and we have structured everything around that. We've been lucky. I personally knew, I was familiar with, and more than familiar with, the quality and the kind of personality aspects of GlenAllachie over a long period of time. So what we inherited was no great surprise to me, and I had in my mind in advance of the acquisition exactly what it was, the tools we had to play with, and the direction we wanted to take the distillery and the liquid in. And we're well on the way to that journey. I mean, it's no secret that we wanted to, I'm not saying reinvent GlenAllachie, but rediscover it as quite a richly sherried experience for the consumer. And that is unquestionably the journey we're on at the moment.
How differently are you running GlenAllachie from the way that you ran Benriach, Glendronach, and Glenglassaugh when you were running those distilleries? Has the process, or at least the goals changed at all?
It's a challenging question, Mark. My kind of immediate reaction is that the goals haven't changed, although perhaps we have been more sympathetic in terms of taking the foot off the accelerator a little bit. We just wanted to spend more time interfacing with the liquid and the kind of the range of the casks that we inherited, and then to take the liquid on the next journey, or take the whiskey on the next journey. We're probably a little bit more patient and a little bit slower in our charge forward.
I've noticed that you're putting more emphasis on the McNair's brand now that you've got GlenAllachie up and running. Tell me what you're doing with McNair's and how that's going to get some wider distribution and some more love in the coming years.
I think, you're right. We are putting greater attention. We will focus greater attention on McNair's over the next 12 to 18 months, indeed longer. The challenge for the blended malt category is to get people familiar with it, and indeed the additional qualities that a blended malt is capable of bringing. It can bring a wider cohort of flavour dimensions. But in the case of McNair's was something that was always quite close to my heart, because many, many years ago, when I was involved with Hiram Walker and Ballantyne's, McNair's was in their stable. And actually, I remember being part as a supervisor, spending some time as a supervisor in the bottling plant at that time, actually bottling some McNair's during that period. So the brand has always interested me. We have reinvented it as McNair's Limerick, and it's in my opinion, I hope this doesn't sound conceited, but it's a well-balanced, quite richly peated blended malt. And that's where we're starting the engagement with the consumer. This is why you will like this product. Done a lot of work on the support inventory. We've done a lot of work actually putting together the kind of formulations that we think work best for McNair's Limerick as a blended malt. And so we're very comfortable with the quality of the liquid now, the 21-year-old and the 12-year-old. We're doing a little bit of repackaging in terms of design work, and that will come to the market in April, May of this year. But we're very, very hopeful that this category, and particularly the peated aspect, will actually work very well.
I noticed you've also done some new, or at least have some new GlenAllachie releases coming out that don't exactly have that sherry influence that you are known for. I know there's a Rioja and a Bulgari Superior wine finishes that are coming out. Why those two specific ones?
Oh, what a difficult question, Mark. There is a whole host of different wood finishes that we're currently nourishing along. The Bulgari Superior is a Tuscan red wine. It's the casks. First of all, the casks were terrific casks, and we have been monitoring the development very closely. Very, very encouraged with what we're seeing. But, a lot of what we're doing is driven by demand from the consumer. We have, the single malt whiskey consumer is a much, much more informed individual now, and certainly the kind of footprint that we are operating within. There are many, many well-educated, well-informed consumers who are looking for different twists, and that's kind of what we're providing. Most of them work, Mark, and there's a lot in the pipeline. Why the Bulgari Superior? Why the did you say Rioja? Yes.
Yeah, the Rioja.
They're showing. We follow the development of these casks very closely. We will not put anything in the bottle we think has not reached its sweet point. We think in the case of these two particular expressions that they are now at the sweet point and ready to go into bottle and be presented to a very challenging consumer.
These are some of the early examples, I would suspect, of the experimentation that you started when you guys acquired the distillery and got your hands on all these casks. How much of the production and the inventory that you acquired with the distillery was designated for some of these experiments?
Oh, I would say we recognize that we would have quite a big task to do in terms of creating the kind of experiences that we want for the GlenAllachie consumer. So we knew from day one that there would be a lot of activity in terms of re-racking from one style of cask into another style of cask. I have to say that we are very, very well down the road on that journey, and we continue to look. I don't know if you followed, Mark. We did a virgin oakwood release that was a chinkapin, a Missouri oak style virgin oak, Spanish and French, and it was terrific. First of all, we learned quite a lot in terms of the difference between the various genuses and how indeed GlenAllachie reacted with them and the time it took to react and get to the kind of sweet spot that I keep referring to. And we're doing a lot of that. We're going to do some Russian oak. We have done a kind of experiment with Speyside cooperage, where we have taken a small parcel of Scottish oak, virgin Scottish oak, and that's sitting, working away gently at the moment and being followed very closely. So there's a lot of things going on. We've brought in a couple of Mizunara casks, Mizunara oak that has been constructed in a Scottish cooperage, and that will be the start of another interesting experience, and hopefully we can roll that out in, I'm not saying in a huge way, but in a bigger way, so that, first of all, it'll give us the opportunity to learn how Mizunara reacts, A, with Scotch single malt, and B, how it reacts with GlenAllachie. So yeah, look, there's a lot of really, really exciting things going on in terms of the wood management, and I have to say, it does consume quite a lot of my time, both in terms of constructing the plan and then following and making sure that the development of what we're doing is going in the direction that and that we can identify how quickly it's going.
It seems that wood management has become the latest technological advance, as far as we know, in whiskey production, with all the wood management techniques that are being used now that weren't really used 20, 30 years ago. What's next in terms of advancing the state of whiskey?
Oh, what a difficult question. You have to realise I'm a traditionalist in many ways, Mark. And I think really there's another way of looking at that question. I think that for a long time, that perhaps we were reluctant to get involved in aspects of wood management that should have been apparent, but it was I suspect, relatively easy not to do it. Thankfully, the category is now so well informed, the consumers are so well informed, that they're setting the challenges to us all the time to raise the bar, constantly raise the bar in terms of quality. And that really is what's driving it. What next? Well, I'm not sure what next. I think this current period is a very interesting period. And I think a lot of people are investing a lot of money and a lot of time in understanding how their particular liquid interacts with the wood, and learning an awful lot about A, the distillery, B, the liquid, and B, the wood that is compatible with their liquid.
Was it easier or cheaper to skip the wood management back then? Or both?
I think it was both, Mark, and I suspect that the second one was quite a big driver, that you were getting more bang from your buck by recycling casks. But you also have to remember that, the kind of shape of the industry has changed, whereas single malt was a relatively modest, good category, but a modest category 20 and 30 years ago. Today it is, it's accelerating in pace. It's a very important category, and so asks different questions. It asks different questions of people like myself, and indeed my peers in the industry. We have to put into the bottle things that but the bar has been really raised, and there's no disappointment in terms of quality, and that bar will be moving all the time.
So, what experiments didn't work with the GlenAllachie malt? What have you tried that didn't quite work out? If you can name names.
I don't think we have been long enough in the ownership of it, Mark, to actually form that opinion. I mean, what I can say is that there are surprises in terms of some of the wood styles, some of the barrel styles, in terms of how long it takes for us to tease out the kind of flavour characteristics we're looking for. And that's where we are. Nothing, we learned a lot from the past, where we knew there were certain categories of wine casks that could be a little bit risque. We have not tiptoed into that territory yet, and are unlikely to do so.
Which ones?
The poorest, the worst experience I had with some Tokai casks at Ben Riach that just didn't work, and that's not because there's anything wrong with Tokai casks. It was just that we probably had a bad experience, and we've kind of tended to avoid them now, and we take the safe routes. Maybe not.
Let me guess, you put some peated Ben Riach into the Tokai casks, right?
We eventually put some peated Ben Riach into the Tokai cask, yes.
And that didn't work.
Well, it didn't. It didn't work because the equilibrium of the experience was wrong. The balance was wrong. And on another day, we might have got a different batch, maybe a fresher batch that would have worked. But as a consequence of it, we've kind of avoided these for the moment, anyway.
On that note, you had a malting floor at Ben Riach. Have you thought about putting one in at GlenAllachie?
The answer is not immediately, but we are looking. We are looking at what swirls around both the barley varietal and the malting process, and there is a real chance. I mean, we only use Scottish barley that is malted in Scotland at the moment, but we may retrace our steps and look at some of the historical varietals that were used in the past and were abandoned. Look, for a variety of reasons, but I would suspect principally because the yield performance in terms of litres of alcohol was beginning to fade. I'm not sure now in the current thinking that a difference of 20 litres of alcohol per metric ton makes much of a difference in the commercial thinking. But in terms of the original barley varietals, it might make a difference in terms of the quality that we get in the ferment. So we have that somewhere in the diary, Mark, to have a look at and see, could we get one or two of our malting partners to have a look at some of the older fading varieties and could we retrace our steps historically and just have a look at these? And that's not going to happen next week, but it's certainly on our radar.
So that brings up the interesting question that has been a big discussion point in whiskey in the last year or so, and I'd love to get your view on this as a distiller and a blender. Is there terroir in whiskey?
However you define it, I'm not sure what terroir means, Mark. But what I will say is that the basic components of making your product, malted barley is very important, of course. When we acquired GlenAllachie, we moved very, very quickly to long fermentation. So we think that's a very, very important contributor to extending the depth and richness of the ultimate flavour. We're looking at something like 160 hours fermentation now. The environment in which the wood is unbelievably important, and I'm sure I've expressed this to you before. In my opinion, contributes up to 70% of the final perceived quality of the product. And the environment in which the casks are warehouse is also very important. We have taken a decision a long, long time ago that we would never pursue maturing casks in palletized form. We use mostly horizontal racking, and we probably will look to build maybe one or two dunnage warehouses. But these are the things that contribute to what people might define as terroir. You know, I think it's such a complicated question that you could put two identical casks in one warehouse next to each other, and they behave totally different. And what do you ascribe to that difference?
That's the question that whiskey lovers and whiskey makers have been trying to answer for centuries, is how that happens, and I don't think we'll ever figure it out.
I think one thing we can figure out, though, Mark, is that we intensely follow the development of casks. We will be looking at, particularly in different styles of wood, we'll be looking at these casks at least every month to see how they're developing. So we can learn a lot from that. And we can learn a lot from both that sequence of sampling and also we can identify where in the warehouse the casks are. Is it making a difference? So we can make some comparisons. But in the overarching terroir, there are many things that will contribute to that. Absolutely.
Can't let you go without at least getting into the news of the day or the news of the week. First of all, how has the latest lockdown in Scotland affected you guys?
For me personally, I find it extremely difficult. But we're a small country with a relatively not dense population, relatively thin population. So, the problem is a problem, Mark. The lockdowns and the uncertainty that swirls around about them, it's really all about that. It's about the uncertainty it creates. You would like to see that in, let's say, by March or April, you would see some kind of normality beginning to appear. The arrival of the vaccines are very, very welcome. and hopefully they will resolve some of the fear aspects that clearly exist in the general community. But from an operational point of view, we have been very careful. We operate within the absolutely very tight protocols, but we continue to operate basically as normal, but identifying safe cohorts so that people are not bumping into each other. That does make life difficult and maybe a little bit less enjoyable for all of us, the whole team. You're not getting the same kind of interface. Quite a lot of the team in the office are working from home. And these create different kind of social problems.
And the closing of the visitor centers can't help matters either.
No, but we realised very early on that that's one area of the operation that would be difficult to sustain, because the kind of visitor pattern that comes to Speyside is virtually from all over the world. And much as we miss them dearly, it would have been inappropriate that we would keep open and try and encourage people to come on site. So we don't have an issue with the government's dictating that. That's the right thing to do.
How badly have you guys been hurt by the U.S. tariffs on single malts?
I would have to say relatively badly. We can't understand why single malt has ended up being some kind of pawn in discussion between two huge airline businesses. We just don't fathom that at all. But tariffs of any kind, Mark, are unwelcome, and it doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it easy for the importer, who are excellent impacts, that they have to cope with tariffs. I'm sure big companies have a different way of managing how tariffs are managed, but for small companies, it's an unwelcome intrusion for sure. And then you have the additional problem of currency variation. I mean, the dollar was getting relatively weak for a while, so that's an additional problem for the sitting importer. We'd like all of these things to be resolved. Hopefully, they will be resolved within the next few months, and hopefully, the new president, much as he will probably have to look at what he's inherited in terms of priorities. Hopefully that will be one of the priorities that are quite high on there.
Now, there was some good news out of Washington over the holidays in terms of the bottle sizes changing, in the U.S. allowing your European size 700 ml bottles starting now. Will you take advantage of that and start sending more over in 700 mLs that you might not have otherwise been able to send, or will you wait till there's a decision on the tariffs?
There's a lot in that question, Mark. We will start to send some 700 mils over, but not from the core range. We'll wait to see how the industry generally beds that into the system, if in fact they move. I mean, I would suspect that common sense thing to do would be for the industry as a whole to move within a prescribed period of time to 70 centilitre bottlings. And we will follow the pattern. We will not be the architects of what happens. We will be followers of what happens. But in terms of special releases, it's likely that we will bottle these as 700 mils. But it's a great, for us, you're absolutely right. It's really, really good news, because it makes life so much easier in terms of the operation, in terms of bottling, indeed in terms of sourcing materials.
I have to ask, are you guys selling to South Africa yet or not? I wasn't 100% sure, but that'll be the only country that will still mandate 75 CL bottles. Are they going to be hurt by this?
That's a good question, Mark. I don't think they'll be hurt in the short to medium term, because there'll be plenty of 750 ml bottles swirling around. We do supply to South Africa. It's not a huge market for us, but it's a nice market. I think South Africa will think about what's happening in the United States and may choose to align themselves. But I can't think for the South African government. I'm sure they'll get bigger priorities right now than that one. But it would be great if that happened. And I can remember, I'm old enough, Mark, to remember when we all did, everything was 750. And then it became divisive. Not so much divisive, it became different. So maybe we will return to it.
One final question for you. Your son Alistair has his own whiskey company now, the Alistair Walker Whiskey Company, and I've tasted some of his Infrequent Flyers whiskeys and very nice selections. What's the best lesson you ever taught Alistair about picking casks?
Oh, that's a difficult question, Mark. I mean, when you operate, and this is one of the pleasures of being part of a small enterprise, that at some point in your life, and probably during the whole experience with that company, you will be involved in nosing and tasting as part of a group. And that's the kind of experience that serves well for the kind of thing that Alistair's doing now. I think he also he's learned a lot from the previous businesses about the importance of cash management and indeed wood management. And look, I'm really chuffed that Alistair's doing what he's doing. It would have been easy for him to come and join us here, and he may at some point in the future. But running your own business and actually risking your own money is a different game.
When does he get to bottle his first GlenAllachie release?
Well, that'll be a long time, Mark. We took a decision. Virtually as soon as we knew we were going to be successful in acquiring the distillery, that we wouldn't release anything into the third area just yet. And that's lasted now for 3.5 years. You'll remember from my Glendronach days, we never sold the Castle Glendronach outside of our own ownership. My suspicion is that this will continue to be the case with GlenAllachie.
Does he get first dibs when you do, though?
He is unlikely. He is unlikely to be put in that position.
In addition to McNair's, there was one other brand included in the deal for the GlenAllachie, the venerable White Heather blended Scotch brand. Now that McNair's is well on its way, Billy Walker and his team plan to revive White Heather this spring. Look for a 21-year-old White Heather to be released in April or May. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by the Distiller's Edition collection lineup of single malts from Diageo's classic malts. Look for the new editions of Oban, Talisker, Lagavulin, Cragganmore, Dalwhinnie, and Glenkinchie at a whiskey shop near you. Get all the details at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Friday night during the Happy Hour webcast tasting with our guests Alexander Rossi, James Hinchcliffe, and Tim Durham, I opened up a bottle that I've had sitting on the shelf for a while now. Back in 2016, Duncan Taylor and Company released the Ecurie Ecosse 8-year-old blended Scotch as part of its Black Bull sponsorship of the Scottish sports car team, with all of the proceeds going to Sir Jackie Stewart's Race Against Dementia charity. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is malty with a touch of toasted caramel, along with butterscotch, oak sawdust, and a hint of lemon zest. The taste has a lemon pepper spiciness that builds up slowly over a citrusy tartness, along with touches of butterscotch, oak, and vanilla in the background. The finish is long with a lemony tartness, barley sugar, and butterscotch. I'm scoring the Ecurie Ecosse 8-year-old blended Scotch a 91. With the inauguration of Joe Biden coming up on Wednesday, let's take a look at one of the 2020 presidential dram rye whiskeys from Proof and Wood Ventures, which started this project back in 2016. and does it every 4 years. The 8-year-old two-term rye was bottled at 51.5% ABV. The nose has good baking spices, along with charred oak, honey, and brown sugar. The taste starts off with honey and brown sugar sweetness at first, followed by a burst of clove and cinnamon, with touches of dried fruits in the background. The finish is long and well-balanced with good spices and a nice oaky character. I approve of this whiskey. I'm scoring the 2020 Presidential Dram 8-year-old a 93. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. Want to find out how Sagamore Spirit is reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye whiskey? Well, while in-person distillery tours are on hold now because of COVID-19, you'll find a variety of virtual tours, tastings, and other experiences at the Sagamore Spirit website. And they're offering WhiskyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting. If you buy a bottle from your local retailer, a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through each product. Visit their website and use the code WhiskyCast, all one word, to access. Please drink responsibly. Bal Blair's 18-year-old Highland single malt starts out in ex-bourbon casks, then finishes up its maturation in first-fill Spanish oak butts. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has sweet notes of toffee, dried fruits, raisins, and a hint of vanilla. The taste is warm and fruity, with touches of apricots, pears, subtle spices, and a nice oakiness. The finish, long and gentle, with touches of spices, dried fruits, and a hint of oak. I'm scoring the Bal Blair 18-year-old single malt a 93. Finally, let's look at a 19-year-old Ardbeg single cask bottling from the Elixir Distillers Single Malts of Scotland range. It was distilled in 2001 and spent the first 10 years in a refill barrel, then was re-racked into an ex-bourbon barrel for the final 9 years. It's bottled at 51.8% ABV. The nose has a wonderful balance of charred oak, peat smoke, apple cobbler, and gentle spices. The taste starts off sweet with toasted caramel and brown sugar, along with a hint of toffee. They're followed by a nice burst of peat smoke and tangy barbecue sauce. The finish is smoky, nutty, and very long, with a touch of tangy fruits. I'm scoring the single malts of Scotland Ardbeg 19-year-old a 94. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,000 whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Gabriel Cardarella again, the Doers guy. I've seen a lot in my years as a brand ambassador for the world's most awarded blended scotch. Like the time I got to host a Doers tasting for some members of a major European royal family. Now, I'm not going to say which one, but they did invite me to come stay at their castle. Pretty cool, right? Well, here's another story for you. In 2019, our master blender, Stephanie McLeod, became the first woman to be awarded Master Blender of the Year by the International Whiskey Competition. And a year after that, she won it again. Stephanie's first creation for Dewar's 15 year, is another piece of history. Sweet, floral, with notes of honey and toffee, a perfectly balanced addition to the Dewar's lineup. It's a great introduction to scotch for beginners, and it's more than complex enough to satisfy whiskey aficionados. So grab some Dewar's 15, call some friends, and make a few stories of your own. That's what a good bottle of whiskey is all about.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. I posted a story about the filibuster distillery indictments on whiskycast.com Sunday afternoon, and Cheney Uffelman, at C. Uffelman on Twitter, tweeted this response from Virginia. Disappointing. As a huge supporter of local craft distillers, I hope they get slammed for this. There's no room for this behavior, especially now with craft distillers struggling to survive, innovate, and create. Similar views from Mark Brownstein in New York. A terrible thing to see. I'm glad the Virginia DEQ is taking action. There is no place for this kind of behavior in the whiskey industry whether craft or otherwise. No excuse. Remember, there is still a presumption of innocence until the charges are proven in court, and we have yet to hear the distillery's side of the story. I want to take you back now to last week's conversation with Finan O'Connor for a second.
Matt Healy, who was basically the matchmaker getting them into Bowen in the first place, has quite a strong understanding of how it goes about being fixed, and Matt is a drop of clear water in a muddy pool of bullshit when it comes to talking about how these things are amended, and Matt assures me no, it can be done locally.
And we're talking about at Potstilled Matt on Twitter, right?
Yes, yeah. Matty Healy, Potstilled, etc. Unfortunately, I'm a generation behind myself, and I talked about people using their real names. But yeah, Matt Healy is Potstilled, Matt, whatever he calls himself on Twitter.
Well, it turns out Matt and Finan were listening to the podcast together on Monday, and Matt tweeted this later. He was in the car beside me when that was coming up, and all I heard was, "Oh, fuck, I forgot about this part. I've never had such a compliment," along with 3 tears of laughter emojis. Matt, I'd consider adding that quote to your Twitter profile. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. My email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and other things that all combine to make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Have you ever seen a whiskey ghost? No, not the ghosts that are said to inhabit distilleries and warehouses, but a ghostly, mist-like vapor when you open up a bottle of whiskey for the first time. Here's an email I received from a longtime friend this weekend. I just opened an 8-year-old independent bottling of GlenAllachie from Darkness. After pulling the artificial cork out of the bottle, I looked into the bottle, and there was a foggy, gas-like haze that dissipated in around 5 or 10 seconds. Have you experienced this when opening a new bottle? Do you know what it is? I have to admit, this one had me stumped. At first, I thought for a second the bottler might have used inert gas to displace the air in the bottle before corking it in order to prevent oxidation. But no one I know of does that on a bottling line. It's an extra step that would add a lot of cost and complexity to the process. And, by the way, the writer said it did not affect either the aroma or the flavor of the whiskey. Darkness is one of the brands that's produced by the Maverick Drinks division of Adam Brands, which also owns Master of Malt and That Boutique Whiskey Company. So I forwarded the note to Sam Simmons, their director of whiskey, and here's what Sam emailed back. Your timing is hilarious, as I just had this very same effect Friday night upon opening a Highland Park 12 from Tesco. It was 24 pounds, and a bottle of Compass Box Flaming Heart I had in the loft. We had no gas at bottling. These bottlings use synthetic cork, which costs us 7 to 10 pence less per unit, conserve a limited natural resource, provide zero risk of taint, and a much more secure seal. This latter benefit is directly related to the mist observed, although both my examples above used organic cork and still had the effect. Condensation does occur inside the bottle. Have you ever seen droplets on the inside of a closed bottle neck? This is part of the same phenomenon that your listener observed, but rather than the condensation being trapped in the headspace between the top of the liquid and the closure being in liquid form, it's in gas form and is released upon opening, the ghost in the bottle. Totally harmless and totally to be expected if the bottle has been in multiple temperatures. For what it's worth, I looked into production records, and this run of Darkness limited editions was bottled at our facility in Portobello, Scotland, over a hot spell August 6th and 7th, and left the facility August 27th, when temperatures were much cooler. I hope this helps, but suffice it to say this gas was harmless, and I'm delighted he still found the whiskey's taste and aroma had not been affected. Sam, thanks for helping us answer this one, and if you see a ghost when you open a new bottle of whiskey, it's not a mystery, just science. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers, bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, our whiskey photo of the week, and of course you'll always find a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to 2005. We love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
You know, people always ask me, does Redbreast go better with ice or without? Would it go well with figs, dark chocolate, apple crumble? Is there one particular thing I should enjoy it with? I tell them, yeah, other people.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
At Dewar's, we love a good story, and that's why we're always writing new chapters. Like our Caribbean Smooth whiskey finished in rum casks, or Ilegal Smooth finished in mezcal casks. As a 174-year-old brand, we could rest on our laurels. Instead, we'd much rather continue writing, because when you keep telling the same old story, that's when people stop listening.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.